I guess I should start by saying this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in a really rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance, near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous. Lots of open farmland, plenty of woods, and barely any neighbors. It's what my soul always wanted. I am an only child, also, and have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring home toys. Not just little toys, I'm talking go-karts, dune buggies, and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle, and I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride the dune buggies until dark. I forgot to mention, I just recently moved full-time to the property. For years, we would only visit the land on the weekends, so it's a different feeling knowing you don't have to go back to town. My parents live about 3 hours away from the land, so seeing them on the weekends is a treat. They bring up all kinds of goodies. The land is beautiful, about 30 acres more than half of which is cleared. Years ago, a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course, a pond with a ton of frogs. One night, we all got wild hair and decided to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so him and my fiance decided to ride together. Me and my mother decided to ride separate on the wheelers. These four-wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they are ready to ride a while. And damn it, also forgot to mention that for miles outside of the property is the Cherokee Wildlife Reservation, so there are miles and miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property, about 20 minutes out, is a creek. Once you pass through it, you would go up the mountain on the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads. Before you get to the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I have taken this road for years. I have had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be the night that I will always remember till I die. My dad, fiance, uncle, and aunt had gone ahead of us, 5 minutes ahead of us to be exact. My mother and I had been out making a drink. Yes, my wheeler was a cup holder, and I was gonna bring alcohol with me, damn it. After we passed through the creek and up the mountain, I noticed the beams of my mother's wheeler start to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan too cool engine has kicked on, so I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are houses near the end of this road and near the beginning, so there's a gap of about 5 miles long of woods, and an occasional dirt road for gas as well. By the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we are supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on. When it dies. Now, like I've said, I've been out in these woods my whole life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird things, or feelings, or anything. My mother calls to my dad and tells him what's going on, but no calls are getting through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but leave the lights on. The road is narrow, so narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk guy flying around the corner and not seeing us. As my mother tries calling my dad again, I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right with it. There's power to it, but no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be a lot of things causing that. So I get my phone out and text my fiance, letting him know we were stuck in the middle of the road. We were sitting there for a good 10 minutes, when all the hairs of my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights to see a man walking from the pitch darkness. He had no light, and he said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got my dad on the phone, I whispered to her sternly, "Ma, there's a guy walking up on us." Now, my mother tends to panic at times. I never took my eyes off him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out much features. My mother is freaking out and I tell her to leave the shit and jump on my four-wheeler. As she does, I yell to the guy who is obviously getting closer, "Hello, what the hell?" He said nothing. This seriously freaked me out. Like, who the hell walks down a pitch dark road in the middle of the night without a light? And not say something as you approach other strangers. That's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy out there, so he probably knew we were women. Normally, I keep a 38 on me, but my silly ass left it at home. Out of all times, this would be the one time that I forgot it. I start my wheeler up and my mother hops on. The man is still getting closer. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans, dark hair, but not much more. He had a gun, not in his hand but visible on his hip. He still isn't saying a word, which makes us kind of panicky the more. He also was not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realize I can't back up because I can't see a damn thing behind us. So I threw it in high and took off past him. As we passed him, he just stood there, facing and following our direction, yet never looking up at us. It was pretty disturbing. We make it news through the creek, and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us shelling. He was at the wheeler in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy is there, on his own wheeler. My mother and I just sat there, staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mother eye contact, and ended up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad asked us, "So, where did he come from?" I told him the darkness. He just walked up without a light from the road. My fiance chimes in. He had a wheeler and tow straps. Y'all didn't talk to him or anything? My mother and I just stared at him, with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife had heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't even pass their driveway. The next day, me and my fiance head to the sand spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about halfway there when the four-wheeler had died, and just a few hundred yards down the road was an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind the woods was a rundown barn-like cabin, with no power, no vehicles, and no signs of recent life, and definitely no sign of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed the man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I looked at my fiance, who had a worried look on his face. Inside the barn was stuff that you would expect to see in a garage. No indication that someone was living there. As we backed away slowly, I started to notice that there were vans hidden in the woods, like a homestead. They were run down, and I'm pretty sure they didn't run, but still. And that's when my fiance grabbed my hand. We quickly got back to the Jeep. On the way back home, I told him about the vans. He said that he nursed them too. He noticed them at the same time he noticed the man staring at them from inside the barn. Always bring protection if you're going to be in the middle of nowhere. One time, while driving in the middle of nowhere in France with a friend, the whole night just felt so eerie for some reason. I won't get into all the prior details, but when we parked in front of our hotel, it was strangely quiet and dark. All of a sudden, a group of people in a trance-like state started walking out of the woods from different areas all around the parking lot. The woods were just about a foot away from where we parked our car. It was so creepy and intense. The first person to come out of the woods was a lady. She didn't even acknowledge us as she walked right in front of and beside our car. She was so tranced out. More people hide in the woods than you would think or imagine. Another day, I was walking in the woods in my backyard. I often walked alone in there feeling safe and solace. Once I was pretty far in, I turned around a bend and was scared out of my wits to see a naked man just laying there on the side of the path. He must have been slinking his way through the woods to get there before I did, or maybe he was just laying there for a long time, just waiting for someone to see him or walk into him. I ran like a bat out of hell, thinking he was going to kill me. It's safe to say there are a lot of creepy people as well as creepy creatures lurking out in the woods just outside of our homes. Before I tell you my story, I must give you a bit of background. I live in the state of Idaho in the US. I work on a farm and live in a very small town and live just down the road, about an hour from where this happened. But when I heard a story from a neighbor, curiosity got the best of me. My friend Bill told me the story of the water babies. We were at my house in the garage. Bill was talking with my dad about fixing something in the house. The talk moved on to hunting stories, then stories about seeing weird things in the woods. My dad has a ton of stories like that handed down from my grandpa. After a few stories, Bill told the tale like this. You see, the story behind the water babies is that two main native tribes in the area, the Shoshone and the Bannock, or as they call themselves, the Shobans, would perform an ancient ritual. Nobody remembers any specifics of the ritual. It's lost to history, but the purpose is fairly well known. Whenever a set of twins were born, the Shobans would take the babies to the marsh where the Blackfoot and Snake Rivers joined. They would throw the babies in the water, and the one that floated was kept, and the ritual was ended. The belief is that the twin is good and the other twin is evil, and they believed that the good one would float to the surface, but this meant a lot of babies drowned, whether one or both the twins died. Anyways, it is said that if you drive to Tilden Bridge, which overlooks the smaller of the two rivers, and shut your car off, you will hear odd noises, small thuds and thumps, as if something is crawling all over your car. I've heard of water babies before and seen the Tilden Bridge, but I never joined and put the two together in my mind. After Bill told us what water babies were, he told me that after his brother experienced the noises and his friends, they drove away from the bridge on a dirt road. The next morning, Bill's brother got up to find his car not only caked in dust, but covered in small hand footprints. I scoffed at this. It's a fairly lesser-known local legend, although old-timers are dying out, so it's not as well known anymore, and I never believed it. Until one night 2 years ago. A group of me and my friends. I was the one driving, and my cousin in the cab, and my girlfriend in the middle front seat, her best friend in the passenger, and the other two girls were in the back. We wanted to spook out the girls, and in all honesty, we all were pretty creeped out as it was. We told them we were looking for ghosts and it was a moonlit night, so if we did see anything, we would be kind of screwed. This amped up the fear of the unknown factor big time. I was driving, so I parked and turned my pickup off the middle of the bridge. It is a rarely used bridge due to it being in the middle of nowhere, so I felt comfortable parking on the bridge. We sat in the darkness for a minute expecting something to freak us out. The car was full of us kids being loud and goofing off, so it wasn't too creepy. After a minute or two, we decided to leave nothing, because it was too spooky and nothing was happening. The mist of the river rolled over my truck's windows, which made everything look more horrifying. To tell you the truth, we all decided to do something else, so I turned the key and nothing happened. The girls thought I was playing around and telling me to push it in the clutch or just joking. Idiots, let's go. My girlfriend told me, not funny, okay? Just go. I told them that the car wasn't automatic and had no clutch. The girls grew quiet, and I saw them go pale in the moonlight. I tried for about a half an hour to get this car to start, but it just wouldn't work. I was too scared to get out and pop the hood. Everyone was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I kept turning the key, and my girlfriend's best friend in the passenger seat had her window down a small bit. Through the small slits of the window, we heard a baby screaming, not too far from the river bottoms. Mind you, we were miles from the nearest town or any farms, so it couldn't have been some baby a little ways off, because we were in the middle of nowhere like I said before. We were literally like a half an hour from the nearest town. We then started hearing soft thuds and bumps of the roof and hood of the truck. We all freaked out after a few turns. The engine still wouldn't go, until we heard a thud and felt the truck move forward a bit. I turned the key one last time and it started up. We pulled out of there as fast as we could over the dirt road. We were all done with doing anything else that night, so I took everyone home. When everyone was dropped off at home, I drove back to my house, parked the truck in the driveway, and ran inside. The next morning, my dad yelled at me for letting kids climb over the truck during the night. I told him I wasn't even near any kids last night. He led me to the driveway to the truck and said, "See all the hand and footprints all over?" The truck was covered in dust from the dirt road, and as he pointed to it, I noticed small handprints and footprints on the hood and in the bed. It's been 2 years. but I will never go back to Tilden Bridge again. I have experienced some weird crap in my life, but all I know is that I believe in Bill's story. I've worked as a park ranger for a little under 10 years, most of which I spent working at Yosemite National Park. Honestly, this job is pretty mundane most of the time. The most exciting things being random deer mutilations and teenage party sites. One day, however, I was doing my usual rounds and making sure everyone was out of the public facilities for the night. I was locking up the doors to the bathrooms when I heard what I thought was a little girl whispering. It was ever so faint, and if it wasn't such a still day, I wouldn't have heard it. I sat there for a moment and didn't hear anything further. So, I started walking to where my truck was parked to make my way to my next stop. When I heard it again, a faint whisper of a little girl. I stopped and looked around and listened very closely. Yet, again, I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything. Starting to feel a little creeped out, I quickly made my way to the truck and hopped in. I started the truck up and began to quickly take off when I saw it. A ghostly figure of what I can only describe as an emaciated female. She has long pale limbs with a rubbery-looking skin. Her eyes were pitch black and mouth gaped wide open like her jaw was broken. I freaked the hell out and floored it out of there like a bat at a cow. I didn't lock the gate for that area and got in some serious shit the next day for it. But there was no way in how I was going to face whatever ghost, demon, monster thing that was. I've never seen or heard anything like that since, and I really hope I never do again. Being a forest ranger isn't always as cool as it sounds. Usually, it's pretty boring. It can get very redundant. But, on occasion, we see some pretty spooky things out here in the Ocala National Forest. The story I'm going to share with you today happened somewhere around the Lake George area. Recently, I have been extra vigilant while roaming the woods. We have had several reports of what people thought could be an exotic pet loose. Some people reported seeing a chimpanzee, and others, a Bigfoot. I had been looking for any sign of chimp or chimpanzees in the area, scouring the ground for droppings, looking through the trees, etc. I honestly thought people were just freaked out by the recent pictures of what some lady alleged was a skunk ape. I felt like it sparked a reaction of hysteria. I've personally never been one to believe much of the Bigfoot stuff, but this day still makes me think twice sometimes. As I was exploring around Lake George, a herd was sounded like a very large branch snap from high above me. I couldn't quite place where it came from, since the birds were very loud that morning. I tried to shrug it off, but I have this incredible feeling of being watched. I started to walk back towards the way I came, when suddenly, the wits went quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the wind. Just eerie silence. I heard another branch snap, but this time, much closer than before. I began to really get nervous, because I have never experienced the woods this silent before, not even with bobcats, panthers, or wolves around. I began to walk at a brisk pace, to try and not look like fleeing prey, but I get about 200 feet away when I hear a loud wailing, which I can only describe as monkey-like. Suddenly, sticks and rocks are being tossed at me from the tops of the trees, and a whirlwind of noise erupts. I run as fast as I possibly can and get to my vehicle and get the hell out of there. The thing that freaks me out the most, though, is that there was nothing in the trees. They were completely empty. I looked up, and it was fall time, so most of the trees were pretty bare. I still have no idea what happened that day. I just don't really talk about it, because I don't want to sound insane. I have worked as a forest ranger for some time now. I've not seen too many crazy things, but things I have seen are absolutely terrifying to me. Me and another ranger were assigned to escort an archaeologist around the park to survey some areas for a potential dig site for some project or something. Honestly, these things are really boring, so I didn't really pay much attention to them. We were climbing a slight incline to get a better view and point of the valley. We sat up there for about 20 minutes taking pictures and samples of the dirt and whatnot. Seemingly out of nowhere, archaeologist guys start yelling for us to come over frantically. We come and see what the fuss is about. He is pointing into the valley at what seems to be a bear, walking on two legs carrying a deer on his shoulders, seemingly effortlessly. I wasn't really too fazed by this and made light of it, saying it was more than likely a bear. But the other ranger was pale-faced and looked horrified. He said that was no bear, and that thing was running with the deer on his shoulders directly at us. We all started to panic and scrambled to get to our ATVs and take off like we had seen Satan himself. Don't know if we saw a Bigfoot or a deformed bear that day, but it honestly scared the crap out of me. I'm an avid hunter. I go every season and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out and into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting season in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it, early in the morning. And I did. I normally get up at around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only two who hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters. And the only others on that land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asking him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather was more than horrendous in the morning. The snow was pouring down and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go. So I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally, the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill and back about 100 to 150 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay too much attention to it. It could have been a number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought of it was kind of creeping me out. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at anything, so I just ignored it and continued to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather, walking to a spot, which is just a short walk from mine. But the lights in the house were off, and if he was up here, I'm sure he'd let me know prior. Even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter. Albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed into his direction, flashing it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't see them turn back or hear them, so I figured they either A, sat down right there after seeing my light, which was considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs, rather than snowflakes, so visibility is pretty limited. I, around this time, noticed that an odd-looking lump protruding from a group of trees. the shrubs atop the hill that separates me and my granddad's house, right where I had movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew if he was hunting on our land illegally, and from that I could see he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during the rifle season, and I could tell just from looking whoever this wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad at the risk of blowing his stunt if that was actually him over there. So, without taking my eyes off this guy, I put on my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So he told me that he'd make his way up, or I decided on my own to give this guy a whistle, to let him know I see him. But he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see this guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out here was a great place to lay down, as I would never be able to see him and his coat was not stuck out. And as I thought, he had no orange on. I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot, and I had a pretty good idea that he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he'd been caught, and he'd saw a 6'5" mad guy carrying a rifle, he started freaking out. His face went pale, and almost instantly he tried to feed me some bullshit that he'd gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. A drive as a coordinator pushed through a thicket in order to drive deer to hunters sitting at the edge of a designated driving area. However, the closest public game land is miles from this spot, so I knew it was a lie. He just wanted to keep on going on about how he was lost and how he fell asleep. He even went as far to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't give me any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think that what this guy was going to do to my grandfather. God knows if he had the chance, and the thought pissed me off. I'm a 17-year-old male, living in the Midwest. My sophomore year of high school, my friends peer pressured me into joining the track team. I thought that this was a good idea, because I wanted to improve my stamina. So, due to this fact, I was asked to join the long-distance track team. To practice, our small team would run in the woods and then to a lake. These woods are mostly used for off-road biking, so we would run in the forest in the dirt paths that the bikes would make. After school, we would run in these woods every day. Time to time, we saw deer. These deer would get very close, so much so that one would only need to take 3 or 4 feet to maybe even pet one. These woods were fun to run in because they could be so secluded. The last day I ran in these woods, it was just another day. Due to my poor stamina, I was pretty far behind the rest of the group, and I had produced a fairly painful side cramp. In fact, I stopped to take a breather. Let me give you a layout of the path I was on. The bike path is cut into a slope, dividing it into 2 parts. The upper half is surrounded in trees, and above that is just more woods. The other half of the slope leads to ponds and more woods. As I was admiring the nature, I heard a loud snap high up in the woods. In so many scary stories, people say they get that feeling, where they feel dread or the hair on their neck stands up. This feeling is very real, as I got this feeling. Turning around, I expected to see deer, yet, to my utter horror, I saw a man. The man was pretty far away, but I saw his jeans and long-sleeved checkered shirt. A bit of background on myself. I am currently a 3rd-degree black belt in Taekwondo, going on 15 years of practicing martial arts. Still, with my knowledge of self-defense, I was put off and began a light jog. To my utter horror, the man began to sprint down the hill. The creepiest part of his sudden sprint was how he used the trees to propel himself. I suddenly realized why he was running. He was trying to cut me off. Realizing I could not outrun him, I said a silent prayer as I ripped off an old stick of a fallen tree. The man finally made it down the hill. I was face to face with what I believed was a homeless man. The smell was very pungent. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had unkempt beard. I warned him to fuck off, and I raised the stick. The man smiled and said words I will never forget. All I want to do is play. At this comment, I closed the distance, delivering a kick into his groin. He moaned and began to stumble. I brought down the stick as hard as I could, breaking it over his head. The man fell on the path. With utter fear in my heart, I ran as hard and as fast as I could. My coach was waiting for me at the end of the forest path. She could see that I was fearful and asked me what was wrong. I smiled weakly and told her nothing. And I decided not to tell my coach anything, because I didn't think she'd believe me. After a few days, I decided to tell my parents, who immediately told me to tell my coach. I told her the next practice, and we did not run in those woods again. To this day, over a year later, I still have decided not to enter those woods.